Bitcoin, the other thing about it takes private property rights, I think, largely out of the hands of government, right? So we've needed government historically to hold this monopoly on violence and to protect the private property rights of individuals, right? To wield the monopoly on violence to say such that no other group can come in and violently violate the relationship between you and your property, right? So you can call the cops if someone steals your car or breaks your house or whatever. But I think that Bitcoin, by being this property right that is totally agnostic of government, becomes a real game changer. Because the thing about that is that governments had that absolute authority essentially to honor or dishonor private property rights. But by having a money that is independent of that authority, it really shrinks the demand for all other assets, right? Every property right in the world is a government IOU, right? You think you own your house, but us, if they come in with eminent domain and say, hey, we're going to build a pipeline through here, here's your check, right? You don't own your house. They'll take it from you whenever they want it. Or they can do something to a lesser degree, and they can just increase your property taxes over time, or they can push you out of it, which is happening, by the way, in many places in the country. States are largely insolvent, and property taxes are increasing and likely to increase more into the future. So I think that Bitcoin changes our conception of property rights in a lot of ways, because now we don't need this monopoly on violence to honor the most important private property right of all, which is money. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. So by creating this huge demand for itself, by being this meta property right, if you will, it's going to suck value out of all other inferior property rights, which it's also defunding large top-down federalized government. So I guess property rights and other assets revert back to a more localized government, which would be what the government originated as, was kind of a localized protection racket. So I think that also dovetails nicely into the sovereign individual thesis, that it actually causes the large state to fragment into many smaller states. And just one comment, I saw something in the chat. People were saying, well, if Bitcoin comes to pass and we defund government, then all these jobs will be lost. How will people survive? I would encourage them to go out and read the book Economics in One Lesson. It's actually, there's the seen and the unseen, right? And we actually drive unemployment through inflation and through government intervention, because every time you confiscate resources to reallocate it towards some politically determined end, you're actually draining the free market of its ability to optimally deploy that capital, whether it's human capital or personal property. So I would argue that, like, homelessness, unemployment, despite central banks' best efforts, by the way, largely these are driven by manipulation of the money supply. So again, Bitcoin, by pulling government's hands out of the money supply, actually shifts us back to that free market paradigm, which is the most intelligent capital allocator in the world and the best wealth generator in the world. So it holds the most promise of any socioeconomic system we have ever created in eliminating or minimizing unemployment and minimizing homelessness. And if you're thinking that, oh, the jobs are going to go away, like, you're not thinking correctly. You're thinking very first order. You need to think second order, third order to start to understand Bitcoin and its implications on the world.
Yeah, I'd love to step in here regarding property rights. And during the fourth turning, what historically happens is that the government needs money, and they get greedy, they have too much debt, and they have to figure out what to do. So they scramble. And there's also a populist wave that supports this. So in the 30s, they said, soak the rich. Today, we're trying to eat the rich, and billionaires are bad, right? That's the sentiment. And so they're going to come for your money. They're going to raise property tax. They're going to increase marginal income tax. In the 30s, it got up to 65% or something crazy for the top bracket. And you'd be silly not to think that that's coming to America right now. If they introduce central bank digital currencies, if you have capital on the sideline, they're going to tax you with negative interest rates specifically to your account. And so what does this do? This forces people with wealth to say, where am I going to store my wealth? The traditional ways like real estate and bonds are gone. Dollars are worthless. Gold, maybe, sure, kind of, sort of. But really what happens is that these people are going to look around and they're going to realize that Bitcoin reinvented property rights. This is the strongest opportunity here. The government can't reach their fingers into my private keys. And so Bitcoin's going to be extremely favorable to big money over the coming years. And I had a tweet recently where it was essentially everyone is short Bitcoin, but only about 1% of us realize it. And I think that's true. It's just an IQ test for the globe. It's people waking up to this new thing. And the longer it takes you means you have a higher price. And so that's just the game we're playing. And if we go that route, Bitcoin's going to be massive and it's going to change society, because now property rights are foundational to society. It enables you to work for something and think long term. And that long-term thinking is when we build important things. It just came to my mind about Nick Carter's beautiful piece on Bitcoin's 12th birthday. We're essentially building something, a cathedral, that will not be completed by the time we finish our own lives. So we're building something longer term than our own human life, right? And there has to be some very strong catalysts in order for that to make sense, that we're not going to see the fruits of our labor, but we still dedicate time to this. So it's clearly going to influence society.
100% agree. What I see coming, actually, and you see this already, we had Druckenmiller announce yesterday that he now holds Bitcoin, which he's reputably one of the best investors in the world. What I think will happen is that in these turnings, right, there's a large, to Brandon's point, a large governmental effort to redistribute the wealth, right, to sort of calm the social fury. Smart money, right? People with assets are going to figure out very quickly there's only one untouchable asset in the world. There's only one place to put your wealth that exists entirely independent of any government decision, decree, any war. Like there's nothing that can unilaterally change or confiscate your wealth stored in Bitcoin. So I think that the game theory of money, as we see these, as governments try to clamp down on wealth redistribution efforts, you'll see a lot of demand surge into Bitcoin. And again, because of its perfectly inelastic supply, you'll see that in real time. The market will signal to you loud and clear when that's occurring. And I love the point too about that, Nick's piece is great. That is the definition of civilization almost, is how many of those projects we engage in, right? How selfless are we becoming? How much of our efforts are going towards creating a better tomorrow for the collective versus pursuing our own individual narrow aims? And that ties back into actually the quote I opened my piece with. It says, quote, "A pile of rocks ceases to be so when somebody contemplates it with the idea of a cathedral in mind," unquote. So we develop larger and better ideas for civilization through this process of free trade. And when we do its opposite and try to rule it by force, we shrink our time horizons, we shrink our ideas, and we basically, it's like an autoimmune disease on humanity. We're attacking ourselves. So the grand promise of Bitcoin, I think, is to just help eliminate a lot of that self-defeating effort that we've succumbed to over time.